Hello, frequencies. You know how we talked this year about finding the miracles in every day? Well, I have to share mine right here, right now. So, as I started recording, a bee took a nosedive directly into my water bottle. So, I had to stop recording, rescue the bee. Um, and then I just started giggling. This is the divine, ever so sweet talking to me and us because today's theme, there is a theme about be women. I'm going to tell you more about in that in just a moment. But this year, we've been able to reroute and recontextualize and restore women's legacies. It's been awesome. I want to thank all the listeners who have been with me from the very beginning, all of our brand new listeners, and our guests who have been able to share amazing wisdom, new thinking, outside of that patriarchal linear thinking, fresh perspectives, because every episode weaves wisdom, actionable tools, and those fresh perspectives to help you discover your creativity and discover your abundance and discover your female frequency. Tuning into the Female Frequency podcast is way more than just listening. It's about stepping into a movement of transformation. This year, we've learned from esteemed guests, including visionary historian Max Dashu, who is renowned for compiling one of the most comprehensive, if not the most comprehensive, collections of female heritage throughout human history. Osprey Oriel Lake, a leading voice in global activism, eco artist Stacy Levy, who collaborates with the forces of the earth and the life it sustains, who remembers the episode with pioneering water activists and Guggenheim Fellow Betsy Damon, spiritual guides, including the defender of female awesomeness, Lisa Lister, interfaith minister, Reverend Francis Faden, rockstar shaman, Allison Charles Story, each have given us pathways and ways to tune into your unique intuition and shut out those preconceived judgments that hold us back. And if you read Allison's Power Animal book, you'll know that bees give us that medicine, that wisdom to help you pollinate special projects and relationships. We've spoken with artists like Brushu Kaleli, Julie Conway, Angelica Trivigliano, and Aramis, who have each brought us inside their studio and given us behind the scenes access into their art making. As we end this year, I wanted to end it with the fan favorite for 2024. So this year, the fan favorite was episode 3 with Max Dashu. And to recap, she is the founder of the Suppressed Histories Archive, who since 1970 has been compiling this comprehensive cross-cultural collection and documentation on female heritage throughout human history. So her research digs into archaeological records, petroglyphs, yep, cave paintings by women exist, iconography, orature, and other visual testimonies to women as culture makers and agents of the earth. Now, Max unearths older nature-based matriarchal societies across the world that existed before the ideas shaped by colonialism and statehood dominated the climate of the culture. In episode 3, we talk about her new book, Women in Greek Mythography, with ancient manifestations of the bee women, not as trickery, but as portals of truth and divine forces of nature. She traces the way sexual politics and patriarchal representations limited what female forms and their stories could be as the sacral, venerated, life giving potency. So here's a small clip from the conversation, and we get into several time periods. We talk about the Greeks and how they appropriated. We go into Paleolithic time, Roman time, and classical periods. So enjoy. And before we dive in, I'm just going to let you know here quickly that I'm going to take a break in January. I'm going to honor the call and have some sacred rest. But just know in 2025, I'm coming back with some inspirational conversations on Female Frequency Podcast. In February, it will be a 1 year celebration. So I know that there's going to be some surprises. And as always, for you visual artists, I am here for you to help pollinate and activate your story and your projects that you have coming up in 2025 and beyond. I'll be offering some workshops, but feel free to email me, Jodie at thefemalefrequency.com, to get started, and definitely check out the website. Hello, sister. I am so happy that you wanted to join us today. Max, when I first came across Suppressed Histories Archives, I felt a lot of emotions. First of all, I felt a sense of being home. I felt a sense of rage because
Mm.
I didn't know all of these things, and I was mad it wasn't part of my education growing up. And I felt a sense of responsibility to share what I felt was important in everything in your archive. You have been archiving since 1970. And as I read your intro, restoring women to cultural memory, political analysis, spiritual awareness, global perspective across the expanse of time on the cultural record from rock art, archaeology, indigenous orature, written records, all testimony since 1970. End stop. I just felt like you nailed it all. And I started going through your workshops and couldn't believe everything in your offering. And today, I'd love for you to introduce your new book that is hot off the presses.
Yes. Yes, it really is. I published it through my own Valletta Press. It's called Women in Greek Mythography, Pythias, Melissae, and Titanides. And those names refer to the snake women, the oracular women, the bee women in some of the priestess traditions in Greece. And Titanides refers to the goddesses before the Olympian pantheon. They're the older matricultural powers of nature. They are not the colonized and much abused wife Hera. There are all these things that happen to the goddesses in Greek mythology. And I go into the transformations that were wrought mythically that reflected the increasingly patriarchal structure of Greek culture. And so I feel like there's two aspects to this book. One is this very positive ancient roots tradition that is there and continued to be there, especially locally in the shrines. But, it gets overlaid with all this state things that are controlled by men, by aristocrats and by colonizers. So there's that part. And then there is this structural oppressiveness, domination that is really the roots of Western civilization. They all look to the Greeks and the Romans, but the Greeks are really a foundation. And that includes things like rape culture
Mm-hmm.
that is encoded in the mythology. And you look at all the gods and the heroes, maybe a few exceptions, they're rapists, you know, and
Yeah.
and the sacred narratives, even like, in the Eleusinian mysteries, the rape of Persephone by her uncle, no less, in an arrangement with his brother, and they arrange for her to be carried off. There is no wedding. He just terrifyingly abducts her and drags her into the underworld, you know. And so I look at the sexual politics in the way these stories are told, because, we have to take this apart, especially because it's not like the Greek stories are dead and gone. They're in current cultural mythology. They are in astrology. They're in
Mm-hmm.
the way that heroes are depicted in movies and just about any cultural narrative that you could pull up, or even brand names, it's all still very much alive.
Wow. I didn't really think about the brand names when I was thinking about this, but I love how you take things apart and keep asking what was before that? What was before that? and really understanding culturally and just not taking out these what could be pretty parts that a lot of I think some of the new renaissance is happening because as people are looking back through Roman times because
Mhm,
that was
mhm.
so barbaric. But what about these? I do have an affinity with snakes, and what what else
Yeah,
can you tell us about the
the
snake one?
Pythias. Well, there's a lot about the snake women. I mean, first of all, even before we get to classical Greek civilization,
Mhm.
we have the older layer, which is the Cretan and the Mycenaean. We're talking about 1500 BCE and then coming forward from there. And so we have the famous snake goddesses from Knossos in Crete, from the great temple there. And there's two statues of women. One is holding snakes upright in her outstretched arms, and the other one has snakes wrapped around her arms and another around her waist, and they all coil up. And then, like a kundalini, right? They
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
they coil around her tall polos headdress with a serpent head emerging at the very top. So, there's a lot of things we could do, a lot of comparative uh, you know, cultural comparisons there. But you have that going on. But what's really interesting, and I'm doing webcasts on this right now this month, about the Cretan archaeology, is that the Cretan seals are full of women who are ecstatic dancers. They're shapeshifters. They turn into birds. They're dancers with wings. Their arms have become wings. And then there are also serpent women in that as well. And there are what the archaeologists dubbed snake tubes. So in the
Mm.
later Cretan civilization, after they were conquered by the Greeks, they had goddesses on bench altars inside the shrines, and in front of them, they had these terracotta ritual stands that have serpents ascending up the sides of them. And so kind of coiled serpents. And so those they called snake tubes, but they were actually offering stands on which a bowl was placed on top directly in front of these goddesses. And some of the goddesses, even at that late period, still have snakes wrapped around their arms that they're holding forward, or they have snakes kind of knotted together in crowns that they're wearing on top of their heads. So there's all this snake iconography in that very ancient period. Then when we come into particularly the oracle at Delphi is called the Pythia, so that means snake woman. And the serpent at Delphi, the story changes once again because initially the oldest account, it's a she dragon, and she's called the Dracaena. And then later on, it becomes the male serpent, son of Gaia, Pytho. So the story changes, but Pytho is murdered by Apollo in his takeover of the shrine from Mother Earth. And so these narratives are all played out. The Greek playwrights like Aeschylus and Euripides tell us about this patriarchal takeover of this ancient oracular shrine. So the snakes are in there very strongly. And also the bee women, the title Melissae means bee women. And it refers to goddesses or nymphae, which are like divinities of the mountains and the springs.
Mm.
Or so we have it used as a title for the priestesses at Eleusis. So these are the priestesses of Demeter and Persephone. They're called bee women. And so is the Pythia at Delphi. She's also has this title of bee woman. And
Yeah.
Artemis at Ephesus on the other side of the Aegean in what's now Turkey also has loads of bee iconography, but that we don't find that exact title of Melissa applied to her priestesses.
Mm. I was reading probably in your archive a little bit more about bees and their symbols and iconography. And my era is probably off because I think this is probably more in the Egyptian time. Maybe the bees were part of signifying when women were pregnant or thought to believe that that was part of it.
Well, the bee is a symbol that's associated with the great goddess Net, the great
Mm.
cosmic weaver in Egyptian cosmology. She's the mother of the gods. And
Mm.
so she had a famous temple in the Delta at the town that the Greeks called Sais, but it would have been Sa or Za in Egyptian. And they referred to her temple as the house of the bee. And what's interesting is that, like in the really old period, like the Old Kingdom time in Egypt,
Yeah.
women were wearing dresses that cut below their breasts, for one thing,
Uh-huh.
but they it looked to me like they were woven in the hexagonal form that be, like the what's the word I'm looking,
The hive.
the hive,
Hex
but
hexagon?
yeah, well, hexagons. I'm trying to think of the actual wax, what they call the wax, honeycomb, the honeycomb. And so like I was thinking this was a woven thing, but then it seems to be that Egyptian women, they would wear a shift, and then over that they would wear a beaded, I won't say apparatus, but this beaded garment that was see-through over their dress. So it may not have been a woven pattern, but the thing about it is has that hexagonal shape to it.
Oh.
So it seems like it's an allusion to the bees, this old style that they wore.
Yeah, you know so much through the iconographies, through your research with pictures and even the vocabulary. It's awesome. And this is definitely getting back to their connections with the earth and not necessarily, being a
Yes.
snake charmer or trying to
No, it's
uh
not about a trick, definitely. It really is. I mean, that's the thing about the archaic layers is that they are matricultural, and that really it doesn't have to do about with deities as personalities, the way the Olympian gods, there are all these myths about, the anger of Zeus or, the jealousy of Hera, all these things, but really about forces of nature. So the Titanides are, the sea, they're, having to do with mountains, they have to do with dawn and night and time and all of these aspects of reality, not so much as personifications, but
hmm
powers in the world, real powers, not
real
theoretical ones.
yes, yes. I love how you just keep giving us information on the contributions that were happening from women, from females, and the connections to the earth. Um, can we talk about your point of view on Venus sculptures? Because I actually found you on Facebook because I was looking up Venus of Willendorf because I wanted to talk about it.
Hmm.
And you had an eloquent, very academic, and perfectly pointed point of view on how even naming these sculptures that were being found throughout Europe, especially like the Venus of Willendorf was found in Austria in 1908, and then the ones throughout France, and how they're not necessarily Venus sculptures in the way contextually that we think of.
Right. I mean, the naming is very culturally biased. And, because we're talking about modern patriarchal European men looking at these images, and the only way that they can see these icons, I have to back up a little bit
Okay.
because, these kinds of small icons of ancient women, whether you see them as goddesses or ancestral mothers, they were sacral. And so, the thing they got right is they're associating them with a divine female form, right? But where they went wrong is they associate the female with sex. That's what women are for, is sex and sexuality. And sexuality is sacred. I'm not saying it's not. I object to pushing women into that one narrow frame, which is what they persistently do, because it also it conveys a certain stereotype that's associated with the Roman goddess Venus.
Mm-hmm.
And back behind her, you have also Aphrodite. So, the statues of Aphrodite ineffectively trying to cover up, her genitals, and her clothing is falling off of her, and she's basically mostly naked. And so it's this is kind of display of the female form for the male gaze, very unlike the very ancient primal images from the Paleolithic, the Neolithic, all kinds of different periods, where the women are shown as fully inhabiting their body. They're looking straight out at you. Sometimes they're cupping their breasts, sometimes their hands are to the belly or even by their sides, but they're stout, they're strong, they're wide bodied. They're not the shrinking violet, they're not pouting at you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something
Oh,
very different. And I think that it narrows almost before you've even looked at them. That label narrows the way that they're seen, which is as sexual objects. And you see different terms applied to them as well, like dancing girls, concubines, fertility idols, which is another very narrowing label
I
that
know. I hear you.
forecloses what we could actually see if we look at what they're saying, what they actually represent, you know. And so with the name actually, because some people say, well, Venus was a goddess, so why, let's reclaim Venus. But they don't understand that the naming came from this Frenchman, the Marquis de Vibray. And so here he is on his estate, and somebody brings him this thing that has been found. It's a little Paleolithic statuette, a little bit later find than Willendorf. And so, because this aristocratic man is classically educated, he calls her a Venus impudique, actually, Venus impudique. So, an immodest Venus. And it was just simply, it was just a naked female form. The head is broken off. It didn't really have anything sexy about it. It was just a female form without clothing. And it was carved in mammoth ivory, very small, 8 centimeters.
Very
And so this
small.
got picked up by all these archaeologists, and they too applied this framing to it, and I just think that, it's so limiting for us because we have to really understand these not only in the context of the Paleolithic Europe or the Neolithic in many parts of the world, but also even in living indigenous societies where these have very much to do with ancestral mothers, grandmothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are used ceremonially in womanhood initiations and in other contexts. And also the fact that they were buried with the dead, because one of the male archaeological stereotypes is that they are sex objects and you don't bury the dead with porn. You know, they wanted to say, oh, they're pornographic. But that's not the intention that's visible. Even if they had their hands on the breasts, that doesn't necessarily mean, hey, fella, come here. It is really much more a signal of life-giving potency, that as far as the context that they have, and particularly in burials, where really what we're looking at is the idea of rebirth, that there's this regeneration of life that's part of the spiritual beliefs. And so I think that it's really important from women's standpoint. This is a heritage that first was really withheld from us, and then when it was presented to us, it was in this trivializing manner that really closes off thinking about them in other ways that are much more congruent with an egalitarian matricultural society where you have descent through the female line. And there's been a real prejudice against any association with matriarchy or matrilineality. And all of a sudden they become very agnostic. Well, we can't really know that. But then on the other hand, they're making all kinds of theories about how these societies were probably ruled by big men and chieftains. And,
Mm-hmm.
they're still projecting patriarchy back onto these ancient cultures. So you really can't have it both ways, fellas.
You can't. No, no. And to a lot of the artists that I know are listening, they should look back on the Venus paintings, even and the Venus sculptures that were being done throughout time, and really look what was happening before that. Look at how they're positioned. Are their bodies being sculpted in a way or painted in a way that looks like defense or
Yes, very much so. Or shame.
shame? Yeah.
And this is an important point because the word for modesty in many languages actually means shame. And so, like Venus impudique means shameless Venus. Okay. Modesty means that, and it's really important to get this across that it's it's a patriarchal concept.
Yes.
And this is something that you do not see in the ancient icons. They are facing you fully, totally inhabiting their bodies. Their
Yes.
strength, very often they're wide, they're everything that's
Yes.
opposite from the fashion industry's advertising that we're all conditioned by, that makes women hate their bodies. And you can see this also in living cultures like Aboriginal women in Australia in their women's business, as they call their ceremonies. There is a pride in the body, a very, very different
Very,
approach to the
yeah.
body.
And the Venus of Willendorf, she does have her hands over her breasts. There's a lot of talk about what her headdress could be because it looks like knobs. A lot of people, I think I'm hearing people say, a lot of people think they could be shells or braids, I heard.
Right. Yeah, there has been a lot of, and we don't really know. I mean, it's like, is she wearing a knotted headdress? Is this supposed to be her hair that's braided? We don't know. And but see, the other thing about it is it kind of covers her face. And there's a couple other examples from the Paleolithic of figurines like that.